Right, let's get started. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to From the Office to the Shop Floor, Cybersecurity Training and Budgeting for Manufacturing. In honor of Cyber Month, our team has come together to bring you valuable insights that you can apply to your planning and strategy development. I'm going to take a moment to introduce our wonderful speakers today. Starting off, we have Melissa Rood. Melissa Rood is a senior manager at Raymond and works directly with manufacturers, including experience with automotive, plastics, paper and steel products. And then also we have with us today, we have Shinzana Kidston. Shinzana is a manager at Raymond's Technology Risk Advisory Group. Shinzana is an information technology auditor, and she's here today to bring us her cybersecurity expertise. Thank you, Melissa and Shinzana, for being here with us today. We're so excited to learn from you. So let's get started.
Yes, good morning. Thank you all so much for attending. We're super excited to talk to you guys about the importance of cybersecurity, especially when it comes from manufacturing companies. If you have a cybersecurity event, and you'll see later on, Shinzana's got some actual numbers to put to this, but it can really cause production downtime, which can be extremely costly. If any of you are in the automotive sector or do just in time, you know how expensive it is to shut down, a tier one supplier or even, one of the direct big three. I mean, it can be thousands per minute to shut down one of their systems or one of their plants. So you really can do some pretty good damage to your reputation in the marketplace, and it would really negatively affect your customer trust. If you had to go to some type of manual system to continue to do production in your facility, if this isn't something you've practiced before, you can certainly have quality issues with your products, or it can affect the safety and security of your employees. You really need to have a good backup plan in place and maybe even practice doing some type of offline production so you can make sure if something like this happened, you're prepared. Hackers can also get into your systems and they can have access to your trade secrets or other intellectual property. A lot of you have maybe secret recipes in some of your products. And if that gets shared with your competitors or if they hold it hostage for you, it can be very costly as well. So I want to jump into our agenda and to what we're going to talk about today. Shinzana is going to walk us through kind of reviewing the current cybersecurity landscape, what vulnerabilities you could have on your shop floor when it comes to Industry 4.0 and AI and the use of automation. We're going to talk about doing a cyber risk management assessment. And then Shinzana is going to give you some proactive security measures and things that you can do to protect yourself, along with some other action items that will empower you in your shop floor so you can make sure you're protected. So with all that being said, we're going to pass this over to Shinzana, and she can get started on giving us an update on the current state of cybersecurity.
Thanks so much, Melissa. So really, security isn't convenient. It always comes at you when you're least expecting it. So it's always, good to have that in mind going forward, especially in the manufacturing industry. There's always things that are susceptible to being hacked. And so there really is just, a great quote from Robert Mueller that I wanted to bring up. And it really is true that there are only two types of companies, those that have been hacked and those that will be hacked, which realistically, it's more those that have been hacked and then those who haven't realized they've been hacked. So looking at cybersecurity right now as it stands, it's really an impact on your day-to-day. Really, the average cost of a data breach can reach up to $5 million. Specific to manufacturing, it's honestly gone higher than that, around 5.6 million. So it's a huge hit to your costs and something that some organizations are just not prepared for. And then, as Melissa mentioned, the downtime, just discovering a breach and then having, all the procedures and steps that need to be taken to resolve that breach, especially if there's stolen credentials involved, it can take almost up to a year, And we've seen that surpass a year. There's some organizations that are spending multiple years really trying to recover from a large data breach. And then the US really is the highest in average cost for these breaches. And hackers and bad actors know this. They know where the money is, and manufacturing is such a large industry across the US. And so hackers really play into that and really try to exploit that vulnerability.
Yeah, it's always shocking to me when I see that slide as to how much it can really cost. But honestly, more than the cost, because hopefully you have some type of insurance to help you with that cost. But more importantly, is the disruption time. I mean, it can be, 9 months to, like you said, a year more before you're really back producing the way you were before a hacker comes along. So it certainly is a huge disruption to the entire company. So we know people are our weakest link when it comes to cybersecurity. I mean, we've talked about, people on the shop floor, even, we think it's an office thing and it's not, right? If you have an employee on the shop floor and they have access, they have just as much weaknesses as, an employee on the shop floor. So kind of how does that impact our business, and how does that make, having employees in general, how does that make, the business vulnerable to an attack?
Absolutely. So yeah, employees really are, that weakest link. Cybersecurity really focuses on protecting information from unauthorized access, protecting that same information from unauthorized modification, and protecting disruption, making sure that you have access to that information. So having employees that may, be negligent, really not paying close attention, can lead to a breach, as well as, a lot of employees using their personal devices at work, sending emails to personal accounts just so that they can keep reminders, clicking on those malicious links. There's a lot of human factor in an organization, which then causes to, all of those weaknesses. But it's not only employees, there's other threat factors that can, give opportunities to those bad actors to breach your organization. So having weak passwords, poor encryption, unpatched vulnerabilities, even misconfigurations within your systems. Also just having trust relationships. So if you have an employee who's very close to a vendor, a hacker can definitely leverage that relationship and find those ways to get in where they shouldn't be.
Yeah, no, it's definitely scary when, you think they prey on the emotional side of an employee or a person. So definitely scary. So with more emphasis that we've seen than ever on, industry 4.0, automation. I mean, we're having labor shortages across the board in manufacturing, just, struggling to find people. People don't stay, they'll jump for a quarter down the road. So, we're turning to more AI and more automation on our shop floors than we ever have in the past. So how can that kind of cause issues, and maybe what can they do, or what kind of training can they do to help support that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the biggest thing that we're seeing AI have an impact on are phishing emails and really those social engineering attacks. So phishing emails, things like that, those are the heavy hitters. And that's what we really encourage organizations to have a lot of training on for their employees, even if they're having internal phishing exercises quarterly or monthly, using, their own crafted emails or using an organization that helps with that. But having, AI available allows those bad actors to look up, what's common language used for this organization, who are the executives for this organization, and including those details in those phishing scams is really a way to exploit vulnerabilities that, employees are just casually checking their email. They see some of those key items and then they go ahead, click malicious links, or, sometimes respond to things with confidential information that they really shouldn't be. Another thing we've noticed with AI is, deep fakes. This is becoming a lot more prevalent as AI advances, especially with voice cloning. Voice phishing is another social engineering technique that a lot of bad actors utilize, and voice cloning allows those bad actors to mimic and impersonate executives, CEOs that really come off as, yeah, I'm getting a call from my CEO. He's asking for a wire transfer. It's an emergency. A lot of people are more susceptible to that because, it sounds exactly like the person that you know and trust. So you're willing to just, forget those security measures and protocols and just go ahead and release information that you shouldn't be, as well as deepfake videos. It's now very easy to, make yourself look like someone who employees know and are more willing to provide that confidential information to, when in reality, truly behind the screen is someone who does not need that information and is really just trying to, take advantage of what they can by using that AI and those new automations that are so prevalent and out there.
Yeah, I mean, AI has been extremely helpful to the manufacturing industry, but obviously with AI and advances in that way, obviously hackers and people can use it for not necessarily the best of intentions as well, right? It puts that same technology out there for the bad guys as it does for the good guys. So it's definitely scary. So I know from a manufacturing standpoint, sometimes you think, like you had said in the beginning, like this will never happen to me. It's never going to be an issue for me. So maybe you could share kind of a, real life case study that, will give them an example of how something like this can absolutely happen to you, and not just your employees you have to worry about, but maybe those third party or your vendors as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can provide a couple examples because there's many methods that those bad actors are using, especially by leveraging information they know about, supply chain requires the use a lot of third-party vendors and third-party service providers. So recently I've come across a local organization that experienced a physical breach. So they had an individual come in impersonating one of their third-party service providers, claiming that they required maintenance, on a product that they were providing to this organization. They were able to answer all the right questions. They knew the executives' names. So the people at the organization were like, yep, this makes sense. That unauthorized individual was able to access a server room and install malware on that network and was able to, have a breach and extract some sensitive customer information. So it was a big hit to this organization, cost them a lot of time and a lot of resources to really rectify what had happened, because really someone was just able to walk in and then steal information just that easy. And then we've also seen, like I mentioned earlier, someone just calling and saying, hey, I'm so and so. I, really need this money immediately. We have a vendor who requires their, payment immediately. I've also seen, for example, a couple years ago, with, an organization I was working with, someone in their accounting department received a text message who they thought was from their CFO, and text message similarly was saying, emergency, need to send this payment immediately for services to be rendered. And $10 million was sent right out the door just from a text message. So those bad actors are utilizing, their information they know about these organizations and sending, very believable information and getting what they want out of it just from a quick text message, someone just walking in saying, hey, I need to perform maintenance. So it is pretty wild, the different situations that they're able to manipulate.
Yeah, it is definitely very scary. So now that I feel like maybe we've scared people a little bit, we should probably get into, okay, now that you know this is out there and it could affect you, what can you do or what options do you have to kind of protect your assets? So you could maybe talk about that. Where should they get started and what can they do?
Absolutely. Yes. So there are a lot of things that are, can be implemented to ensure that you have the right security measures and controls in place to mitigate the risks of someone just walking in or being susceptible to a phishing or vishing scam. So here's some of the items that I'll be talking through today. So really it's just being able to recognize the signs, because sometimes there are clear indicators on what a bad actor is trying to do. Next is being able to ask the right questions, ensuring that your employees know how to be, critical and, asking those things that would, lead them to maybe this isn't a safe link or maybe this isn't someone who really requires this information. Next, strong passwords. It really is more of a focus on ensuring that, there are passwords in place that aren't easily replicated, don't include personal information that can be easily, figured out. And so those are really something that we encourage organizations to do, even lengthening your password length or having a password phrase. It's super helpful to ensuring that you're protecting your information. And then, of course, there's employee training. Like I mentioned, having those phishing, exercises, ensuring that employees are aware of those cyber risks and cyber threats so that they can be vigilant in, recognizing those indicators. as well as appropriate internet usage. So ensuring that employees know not to be going on social media, things like that, that would allow hackers to get into your network and then, cause havoc. Also with appropriate email usage, very similarly, as I mentioned earlier, if someone is sending their work email to their personal emails that may not be encrypted, you're, causing a gap where someone could exploit that. There's appropriate handling of customer information as well, ensuring that you're disposing of things, keeping things secured so that information isn't available to someone who may be accessing your network. There's also physical access and workstation security, like as I mentioned, to mitigate from someone just walking in and being able to access, your server room, or if someone has sensitive information out on their desk and someone's walking through the office, you don't want that information readily available. And then also vendor management and having some cybersecurity methodology in place. Vendor management is a huge risk for manufacturing. As I mentioned, there's a lot of use of third-party service providers. So having a good vendor management program that includes due diligence is super important. And having other policies and procedures in place that cover those cybersecurity risks will really set organizations up for success. So I'll go into a little bit more detail for each of these areas, just so that you have an understanding of what your organization can do and how to start off with each of these aspects. So the first area is recognizing the signs. So ensuring that you're refusing to give out contact information. I know it's very easy just to hand out a business card, but sometimes you want to be a little cautious with that. And who has your email address, your phone number, because those are easy ways to, get a little bit of an insight on how they can send over those like phishing and phishing scams. There's also rushing. If you see someone who's talking to you and they're rushing, they're really trying to get somewhere really quickly, that's kind of a sign that, okay, are they trying to do something and trying to speed things along so I don't notice or I get distracted? So that's really a good sign of, okay, something might be up here. As well as name dropping. If you're meeting someone and they say that they know a lot of the executives at your organization, or they know someone in HR, someone in accounting, that's a little suspicious. Why do they know those individuals? What is their relationship to them? The next big item is intimidation. If someone is coming up to you aggressively asking for information and they seem like they have, they're trying to use what we call like scare tactics, things like that, that's a huge indicator that, okay, obviously they're not coming in with good intentions and should be aware of this. Also, if the individual is making small mistakes, a lot of times if they're, flubbing somebody's name or, saying they have to be here at a certain place, but maybe that's not where you recognize, things like that, that might be an indicator that they really aren't a part of the organization they're saying they're a part of. And that can be a good way to tell, like, okay, something fishy is going on, I should reconsider. And then if they are just requesting confidential information or asking you to do something improper, or something that you think like, hey, I wouldn't do this on a normal basis, maybe I should reconsider, reach out to someone, who I report to, maybe they have some information and redirect that individual so that, they have to reevaluate their approach. So those are great ways to just recognize those signs of a bad actor. Next, just asking questions. So ensuring that, is the correct spelling of the person's name? Does that align with what you've seen before if they're impersonating someone you've worked with in the past? Always asking like, hey, is there a number I can call you back at? I need to check into something just to see like, is their one-time attempt? Because sometimes, a lot of those bad actors don't have a full plan fleshed out. So sometimes it's worth, asking like, hey, can I follow back up with you? Even asking for their contact information. Sometimes they don't have phone numbers, email addresses readily available. So that would be a good indicator that, okay, maybe this person isn't who they say they are. Asking why they need the information is very important. Sometimes they don't have a legitimate reason. They just want the information. So it's good to ensure that you have the why behind what they're requesting. Also, who is authorizing the request? If you don't recognize who's authorizing this request from your organization, that's a big indicator that they're really just making this request without having any validation on if that request is appropriate. And then also a big question is verifying that authorization. If someone is requesting, for instance, a wire transfer, you should be taking those steps and following the process to go back to your leaders and say, hey, is this appropriate? Although it may be an emergency and they're claiming they need funds immediately, there's always time to ensure that what you're sending is appropriate. You're following those protocols and procedures you have in place. So there's just a few questions that you can ask to really get the, check in and vibe to see, is this appropriate? Is the person really legitimate? And should I be, bringing in someone else to validate that this is the right thing to do?
Yeah, so really the summary there is verify, 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 or question, 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 everything, right? Like from the shop floor, I think from a manufacturing standpoint, you do that often, right? You launch a new product and you have a whole quality or a PPAP process if you're in the automotive industry, right? You have a whole process that you go through to validate, check, double check. You never want to send a bad part, right? So you have all these processes in place at the shop floor. And then when it comes to your cybersecurity, oh yeah, someone requested this, I just send it or whatever, right? So yeah, having those same processes, to validate and question and verify everything is just as important in, the data processing or paper side of your organization as it is in the shop floor and your production side.
Absolutely. Yeah. Always keep questioning, having that critical and skeptical mind is the best, attack for these bad actors. And then I just want to go over some simple steps to protect yourself from a phishing email or scam. So a couple things that you can be aware of is checking the sender's email address. Sometimes if they're, spoofing as a vendor or a third party you've worked with, sometimes the email address is just misspelled slightly because they can't use the legitimate email address for the organization that they're spoofing. So keeping a close look at, how are they spelling the organization's name in the email address? How are they spelling their name? That's a good way to identify, are they the company that they're claiming to be? Another thing to look at is a generic greeting. Are they referring to you by name, or is it dear customer, dear account holder, something very disingenuous that, doesn't seem like something that you would receive from that organization that's reaching out or making some sort of request. So very good to look at, how are they greeting that email? And then look at the email's language. A lot of times there's poor grammar, especially if bad actors are utilizing AI and having AI draft their phishing emails for them. Sometimes there's misspellings, awkward language, poor grammar. So those are things to look out for and kind of noticing, did an actual person draft out this email to me? And then be aware of those urgent requests. Usually emergencies, things like that, they don't happen all the time. So you should be very skeptical of those. If it's an urgent request, is it really urgent? Why do they need these things immediately? That should be a big indicator that, okay, this email might be some sort of phishing attempt. And then the last one, a big item here is hover over the links. So sometimes before clicking on a link, it may be written out a specific way in the email, but when you hover over that link, it could just be taking you to a separate web page that doesn't match the link that's written out in the email itself. So that's a big indicator to see, are they redirecting you to something that you shouldn't be entering information into? And the biggest thing to keep in mind is that legitimate companies are never asking for sensitive information via email. They usually tend to call in, have those discussions in person because there is such a risk with emails being hacked or, going through, and if there's emails that are unencrypted. So keep that in mind as well, that usually you won't get those sensitive requests via email. Awesome. Then next, I'll kind of touch on selecting those strong passwords. So I know a lot of us deal with passwords, everything that you're trying to access when it comes from social media, mobile banking, you have to have a password in place. And although it is very easy just to have one password for everything, we really don't recommend it. The best thing is to have, favorite phrases, things that are longer, things that, people wouldn't be able to easily identify and, would be a little bit more complex and complicated that users can't just easily tap into. And then also stay away from dictionary or personal meaning words. So baseball 2024, summer 2024, common names, Sally Smith, those are easy things that hackers can just put in and kind of break passwords that way. So keeping away from those, really common phrases and words. Stay away from meaningful dates and numbers, your social security number, your birth date, anniversaries. Those are oftentimes things that can be easily looked up now that there's social media. A lot of people are, having that information out there. So it's really good to stay away from those common dates, even children's birthdays, things like that. It's very easily accessible and easy to find. Next, don't use sequences using, 1, 2, 3, 4, A, B, C, D. Those are also very easy to identify. So ensuring that you're mixing up your numbers, your letters, if you're using additional characters, trying to randomize those so that it's not as easy to identify. Don't use reversed words. That's a very common practice as well. It's very easy to, spell password backwards, spell your name backwards, things like that. Those are really the first few things that hackers are going to look into. And then always utilize upper, lowercase letters, having additional characters, special symbols, and numbers. Really just mixing up your password will help strengthen it and keep those bad actors out. Also with passwords, never write your password down. Try to make sure it's something that you can memorize. Also, utilizing password vault is super helpful as well. Similar things to like LastPass, where all of those randomized passwords are kept secure so that somebody isn't able to just easily, pick up a Post-it note you have near your desk and access your systems. Never re-enter credentials on a website. That's often a sign that, okay, you may have accessed your system, but somebody might have overlaid something that requires you to enter those credentials again for them to actually steal those credentials. So be very wary of re-entering credentials, especially if you've been logged on since the morning and then it's asking you to log on again. Maybe look into that, maybe restart your device, things like that to ensure that you're just not giving away those credentials. The IT department will never ask for your password. So if someone is reaching out saying, hey, I'm part of your IT team, I need your password to check into, something if they're troubleshooting, that's never the case. They don't need your password to access your system. So that should be a telltale sign as well that, okay, someone is trying to get access to my password when they shouldn't be. And then using those unique passwords or on different accounts. So if you have, a password for your accounting system versus your, another system for tracking parts, things like that, you should be varying up those passwords to ensure someone, if they get access to one system, they can't get access to everything. Next big item here is training for employees. So as mentioned earlier, phishing trainings, those are super important. Continued education on that. So having those exercises done quarterly, monthly will be very beneficial to help employees identify those bad actors and, scams that they should be wary of. Education on threats and best practices is also beneficial as well. There's a lot of subscription services that will provide cyber threats, cyber best practices. So that's very recommended to share with employees. And again, training, it just needs to be performed regularly. The more reminders employees have and individuals have, the more that they'll be conscious of it and aware of those items. Internet usage. So this is a large thing to be aware of. So use of internet for business purposes only. Do not download any unauthorized files such as program updates or softwares. Those should be only things that are validated through your IT team. Do not distribute unauthorized files, including pictures, sound, video, or text files. Don't subscribe to any unauthorized internet-based services. So a lot of times we see organizations have policies in place that outline all of the, specific organizations they, allow subscriptions for, the sites that are okayed, things like that. So anything that your organization isn't saying, yep, you've got the thumbs up for it, tend to stay away from those. And then don't post sensitive information to groups or forums or support sites. All of those should be able to be supplied in a secure environment, or if you're working with a vendor for support, they should have information on their side that should be able to help you out. Email usage, also very important. So email accounts should only be used for conducting business. Refrain from using your email for your business for personal matters that would, have some of your personal information. Email forwards are a large source of viruses and password stealing as well. So just be wary if you're forwarding a lot of information to, especially external sources. That could be an easy way for those password stealing code applications to come in place. And then emails from unknown senders should not be opened or responded to. You should let IT know if you get something. Have them review any suspicious emails. We've had organizations as well utilize tools that help scan emails for any suspicious links or anything like that. And then there's handling of customer information. So ensuring employees use all reasonable care in protecting that customer information. So any printed reports, receipts, etc., that contain customer information are shredded when appropriate and when that information is no longer needed, and it's placed in proper bins for disposal, as well as electronic media. Any of that contains or previously contained customer information must be destroyed or securely wiped to prevent recovery of that information. Awesome. And now physical access control. So as I mentioned earlier, we've had instances where somebody just walks into an organization and gets access to things that they shouldn't. So there should be some safeguards in place. So security measures like a visitor log, always asking visitors for their credentials, never leaving someone unattended. You should always be escorting anyone outside of the organization throughout your building. So do not bring in visitors without permission. And then always ensure they're not putting anything on computers. If they need to use software or any physical equipment that you're monitoring that, ensuring there's authorization from your IT teams. Workstation security, as I mentioned earlier, so always making sure you're locking your PC when you step away. I know if you're working in cubicles, it's very easy to just leave your desk and have whatever is on screen still open, but we strongly advise locking it because someone else could walk by and gain access very easily because they don't need to log in. Ensuring sensitive business information is under lock and key when unattended. So if you have physical papers on your desk, ensuring you put those away anytime you leave. And then always storing your laptop or media in locked spaces, especially if you don't bring your laptop home with you and you leave it at your office, ensuring it's still locked in place, although it may be secure in the building. If someone accesses it, you still want to have those safeguards in place that it's locked away in your desk or in your office. And then when you're using your laptop offsite, being aware of your surroundings, connecting through a VPN, a secured network, and not just joining public Wi-Fi, things like that to ensure that you're protecting your information on your workstation. Then there's vendor management. As I mentioned, this is very important for manufacturing as a lot of work is done with third-party vendors. So you want to have specific kind of processes in place. So there's selection due diligence, what is needed by that vendor to ensure that they are right for your organization. How is their reputation? Do they have business continuity, disaster recovery plans in place if anything goes wrong for their organization that may impact yourself or a breach to your customers' information? So having that selection due diligence is very important, looking at their financials, looking at their service providers as well, ensuring that they have all the security measures in place that they need to protect your information. Another big part of vendor management is contract reviews, ensuring that you're reviewing the contract that you have with those third-party vendors. If they're providing services for you, there should be specific, how long should it take them to perform that service? What are those costs? Things like that. So ensuring that you're reviewing those contracts and they have everything in place that you need for them. And then annual due diligence. So it's not only just when you select that vendor, things change over time. There's always new cyber threats. So doing an annual due diligence check for those critical vendors, ensuring that they're keeping up with their safeguarding. They have, testing done for their business continuity disaster recovery on an annual basis to ensure they're keeping up with those procedures to ensure that your information you have with them is safe. And then lastly, development methodology. So performing things like business impact analyses, risk assessments, as Melissa mentioned earlier, risk management and risk monitoring. to ensure that you are aware of everything going on in your organization and continuously safeguarding those, vulnerabilities that you might have. Risk monitoring is very important. It's continuous and ongoing. As I mentioned, cybersecurity threats, changes, always. There's always new threats, new advances, things like that. So having a good methodology, policies, procedures, things that are, vetted, looked at, specific things you need your organization to follow, it's very important to have those in place. And so I'll share a graphic here that kind of shows you how many savings your organization can have by implementing those things that I mentioned. So employee training and having encryption, having, a team dedicated to looking at your security measures. It provides a lot of savings and could really benefit your organization. And I know, Melissa, you have a lot of experience with manufacturing. Do you have any advice on kind of how organizations can budget, especially for cybersecurity and those IT risks?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, Shinzana's kind of talked about, where do you even get started? So hopefully all of you are starting to think about or are in the process of doing your annual budget for the following year. Just to give yourself a good starting point and a good launch point for January next year. And, part of that comes with, developing a committee or a group. And it's the same thing when it comes to, our IT structure. So, putting together some type of IT steering committee so that the organization understands that cybersecurity is not just the responsibility of your IT department. I mean, as you have heard Shinzana say, it's your vendor. So there's your purchasing group getting involved, right? It's your employees. So that's your shop floor supervisors getting involved. So, it's the entire organization that needs to be concerned about cybersecurity. So getting a key group of employees to get together to, just talk about and support and help carry this workload, for the organization is super important. And maybe that means, you're using an outside company to help support you because you don't have, the internal staff, or maybe you need to budget for an IT person for next year, because you've got these growth ideas planned for the organization. And so, what you could handle internally before, now maybe you need some external support or you need some additional internal support. So, I mean, where do you even start with that? As Shinzana said, you can do risk assessments, you can do, risk management analysis that kind of is going to help you understand your gaps. So I look at this budgeting for anything, it doesn't matter if it's your CapEx, it doesn't matter if it's your repairs and maintenance budget or your IT budget, it's all the same. It's understanding your gaps, understanding what it is you need, and putting priorities around them. So, if you do some type of risk assessment, whether that's internal, whether that's external, or your steering committee just comes up with, hey, now that we've attended some webinars and we've done some research on our own, here's where we feel the issues are. It's, people getting access to the building. It's, training for our employees. It's maybe putting a system in like LastPass or something so people aren't writing down their passwords. So now you've put those things on a list and you're now prioritizing them. Prioritizing them is going to help you understand what it is you need to put into the next year's budget. And it's just like your equipment. I'm sure your operations people put together a list of, $1 million of equipment they need every year. And of course, some of them are nice to have, and some of them are necessary because if we don't do this, then we don't produce parts, right? So it's the same thing with your IT assessment, understand those gaps, prioritize those gaps, and what do you need to do now to make sure that you have at least some coverage? And then allocating some funds for that in your budget, and start small. Maybe it's just, do you even have cybersecurity insurance coverage? Maybe you should check on that. What, do you have it? Do you not? And what does it even cover? Maybe it's training for your employees. If you go to your bank, for instance, like phishing for, Shinzana had mentioned, sending wires. Someone says, hey, I need this wire sent immediately. A lot of banks in the area offer free training for those, for their existing customers. So, maybe there's some free training or other things out there that you could look for as well. So, I think just budgeting something every year and putting a priority around it, making it a priority for the organization. Every little thing you do will put you in a better place tomorrow than you are today, right? And it'll protect your future. So just making sure regardless of what it is, that you allocate something in your budgeting to make sure that you're covering, this IT security. So I think maybe Shinzana, it may make sense. Is there any way you could dig in a little bit more to like the risk assessment? Just, even if it's just going through like a few quick steps so that they understand what even is a risk assessment, and where can they even get started to do something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So risk assessments really look at all of those critical services, critical applications that your organization has in place, and really doing an evaluation on, okay, if something were to happen that impacts this area, what is the risk to our organization? Will it impact our customers? Will it impact our, response time or our, have any downtime in place? So evaluating that risk for that and providing it a risk rating. So sometimes, if for instance social media is something that we now is seeing very prevalent on risk assessments, because you're exposing your organization, you're trying to get the word out there, but it is a lower risk. If something happens with your social media, yes, there's very big impacts to your reputation, but that's a different risk than somebody hacking into your wire system. So a lot of things that we recommend, and Raymond provides this service, is doing that critical look at what each part or important business function that's available at your organization, what are those things that will impact it? What should you be, considering and aware of, so that throughout the year, as things happen, you already have procedures and steps in place based off that risk assessment to act and response to those things timely, efficiently, and at the lowest possible cost. And that also helps by having an audit plan in place. So risk assessments are very beneficial and crucial for an audit. So if you have your risk assessment in place where you've identified all those critical functions in your business, critical applications, you can then have that ongoing monitoring by having an audit performed and ensuring that those things are functioning properly and they're in place and there's no gaps. And if there are gaps, those things are identified before a threat comes in and exploits those vulnerabilities in those gaps.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, just, understanding kind of where you're at and where you want to be, right, is super important to even getting started on a plan. So thank you for that. I think that was just helpful understanding from a budget, where do they even begin? Once they could form this committee, what do they do next? So just, we're back to the question, right? Question everything in your system and your setup. So, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you can even request this of your third-party software vendors and stuff, right? If you have other vendors out there, right, you can ask, do they have a risk assessment? Do they have a, cybersecurity assessment? And make sure that they're as protected, or their protection is at a comfort level for you as well.
Absolutely. Yes, that's a great question to ask as part of your due diligence process as well, ensuring they have those safeguards in place.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I think we've kind of made through most of our information that we wanted to cover today. If you could maybe do a summary and give some top recommendations, I think it does look like we have a few questions, so we'll answer those after you get through this summary.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Melissa. So yeah, as she mentioned, there's quite a few things that can be done to help with that budgeting, but a lot of top recommendations we have are first, establishing that cyber risk ownership and oversight within your organization. It's really a top-down approach. Executives need to be aware of these risks and really setting that tone for the entire organization. Having those policies and procedures in place, that governance is really the guiding force for a lot of your cybersecurity responses. So this is a great place in ensuring that everyone's on the same page, what the risks are, and here's how we protect from those risks. And then vulnerability assessments, penetration testings, this can be done internally or having this outsourced, but identifying those gaps and vulnerabilities ahead of time so that those threat actors and bad actors can't exploit them. You should be aware of everything that's, kind of out there for your organization. And then, as Melissa mentioned, having cyber liability insurance to protect yourself, incident response, disaster recovery, business continuity, those are huge things to have in place, especially if you happen to encounter a breach or something goes wrong, you already have a plan in place to act. So a couple of other recommendations are on this slide, so feel free to take a look at those. We'll be providing the presentation afterwards, But these are just great ways to ensure that you're protecting your organization as cybersecurity becomes more and more prevalent in your industry. So as Melissa mentioned, we'll be taking some questions.
Yep, it looks like we have a couple of them. So the first one is, what are some potential cybersecurity trends that you're seeing that are coming, for if we're going future forward looking?
Absolutely. So really some large trends, I'll focus on a couple here, but the first one being a zero trust architecture. So this is really increasing those safeguards on who has access to sensitive information. And so you really have to go into it with the zero trust mindset. Yep, there may be an employee who's been at the organization for 25 years, you wholeheartedly trust them, but there's always that slight risk that they may do something on accident or intentionally that would lead to a breach or, getting access to sensitive information that shouldn't be accessed. So having a zero trust architecture set up, which is, really limiting who has access to sensitive information, limiting who has access to administrative functions that grant and remove access to systems, having just a key group of people, usually in your IT department, having that access, which is separate from business functionality. So an IT user who has admin access to grant and remove from a system should not also have access to sending out wires. Really having a segregation of duties and then ensuring that only users who are absolutely necessary to have sensitive information access are the only ones that have that access, and not just having a broad stroke approach of, yeah, everyone has a business need, they all need that access, when truly some employees aren't using systems as often as others. So really having that, mindset of limiting that access is super important. Another trend that we're going to be seeing in the future a lot is cloud security. So a lot of your third-party vendors are moving off of on-premise servers, things like that, and moving to the cloud. So this is something that's super helpful to have at the forefront, because there's going to be more security measures that need to be taken in place, because now your data isn't physically stored anywhere. It's really up in the digital realm. So what are those protections you have in place to ensure that you can always access that information because you don't have physical access to it? So ensuring those measures are in place. And then also supply chain safeguarding, very, very important. And this really is along the lines of having that vendor management program in place, performing that due diligence on those third-party service providers that are crucial to your supply chain, and ensuring that they have security measures in place to protect your data.
Great, thank you. It looks like we have one more. It says, how can my cybersecurity stay compliant with the industry? So with all of these things constantly changing and, all the things that you're just saying that we need to look out for in the future, how do they stay compliant?
Yeah, and that's a great question. We always encourage continuing education for your entire organization. Not only your IT department, who should be, keeping up with cyber trends, cyber alerts, things that are going on in the news, but giving those, at a high level to your entire organization. So there's many resources. One, for instance, is CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. They offer a subscription program where you'll get email alerts when there's new trends coming out. They offer trend reporting on cybersecurity and have many, many updates that can be very beneficial to your organization, and things that, everyone should just be aware of. If there's, a new guidance on passwords, they should be, 13, 14 characters versus the common 8, things like that. You should just be, having continuous education on to ensure that you're keeping up with all of those changes and, emerging advances, emerging technologies, things like that. And oftentimes your third party service providers may also have a similar subscription program where they're providing different information or alerts and topics that will be really useful just to share, monthly or, quarterly to your organization.
Great. So it looks like that's it, but I have one more for you, because I get this quite a bit from my clients is cybersecurity insurance even worthwhile? And, I have filled out the application more times than I want to talk about. And even just filling out the application, in my mind, is a great thing because it helps you identify what gaps you have, right? They're asking you all these questions that, do you have these things in place? And right away, it kind of gives you an idea of what things that maybe should be on your risk assessment list. But so from your experience, is it worthwhile if you put all these measures in place? Does it still make sense to do cybersecurity insurance? And I just want everyone to know we don't sell cybersecurity insurance. So we're not saying one way or another. Just in your opinion, is it worth it to have insurance coverage?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great question. Definitely, as you're going through the motions, you're like, I have all these measures in place. What more can cyber liability insurance provide me or offer? And it's true. Although the security measures are there to prevent and detect those risks, there's always going to be situations that can fall through the cracks or be unexpected or difficult to plan for. One of those specifically would be ransomware attacks. You really never know when that's going to happen or how you can respond. And having that cyber insurance allows organizations to act fast because they have monetary support. Oftentimes, in ransomware attacks, bad actors are asking for large sums of money that are really impossible. But having cyber insurance kind of gives you the ability to take a breath and say, okay, we have the support that we need. Let's respond to this rationally and understand, what do we need to do to get our information back? And this can drastically reduce that downtime. You don't know how long someone's going to hold on to your information and exploit you for it. So having cyber insurance where you can say, okay, here's the money that you need that you're asking for, give us back our information immediately, that can really, really impact how much of a cost of that breach will be because it reduces the amount of time it takes for you to gather sums or come to a negotiation. And so it just keeps organizations moving. So again, very similar to health insurance, you just don't know the unknown. And so having cyber insurance along with all those security measures really protects you for any scenario or any instance where your information can be at risk.
Great, thank you. That makes sense. I like I said, I get that question quite a bit from my clients, so it's super helpful to have someone else's opinion on it.
Absolutely.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much, Melissa and Shinzana, for joining us today for From the Office to the Shop Floor Cybersecurity Training and Budgeting for Manufacturing. We really hope that all of you gained information from today's presentation and saw the value of it for you and your team. And although that it's Cyber Month, cybersecurity is a real risk that is facing manufacturers across the board. So as you are planning and budgeting for the year ahead, our hope is that you are going to consider this information from today's presentation. If you have any questions from today's presentation or would like to know more about the risk assessments available, you can scan the QR code on the screen. We'll also be sending a follow-up email with today's recording, as well as the presentation, and also a direct link to learn more about these assessments. But once again, thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Melissa, Shinzana. We really appreciate you all being here today to learn more about cybersecurity and how it impacts manufacturers. We appreciate it and hope you all have a great rest of your week.
Thank you.